You're a big co-host to see everyone. Everyone, so we will wait for around like 2 or 3 minutes for everyone else to join. In the meantime, like Stephanie is already in the Zoom, so feel free to say hi to her, or like maybe ask her any questions that she can answer later.
Yep, I'm right here. Feel free to type in your questions in the chat. I'm excited to chat with. Actually, Mia and I have already started chatting about this remote work phenomenon, so I'm excited for this session.
Really interesting. Okay. Start. Hello, David. Hello, Christians. Hello, V.
The thing with these Zoom webinars is I'm so used to people just popping up on the screen.
Yeah, it's muted, right?
Yeah. This is like really silent.
You guys can raise your hand and then I can unmute you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things when we work remote that our trainers say is that we have to familiar with the silence a little bit because it's not gonna be like in person anymore. So you guys cannot see everyone thinking, like everyone are like doing like take note and yeah.
Yeah, which is why I think it's kind of fun to when you have like these big Zoom meetings to just have everyone join unmuted. Like one of my favorite things is hopping in and I was like, "Hi, Steph," and I'm like, "I don't know who just said that." It's kind of like walking in a room,
Yeah.
and getting greeted everywhere. And then I think that's also why video is so important, even though it's so exhausting, right? So we can be really strategic with using video, but it gives us so many cues. Like I'm a coach as well, and I coach over Zoom, and seeing my coachees through, not just listening to them, it's super helpful.
Yeah, and as I read, and our company like policy is gonna be like some of the time like you can like switch on your camera to show your energy, but some of the time because of the mental health, like we're doing like the work from home a lot, and everyone of course like everyone is exhausted about like the online meeting, so you can switch off like on the
Mhm.
day your mental health is not good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's all about the flexibility, right? For to give people permission to do what's best for them as well.
Yeah. Okay, so while we're waiting for everyone else, I will maybe introduce a little bit about Trimflex and why we are doing this series first. So yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Mia, Employee Experience Managers at Trimflex, and this is EX Monthly Global Expert Chat. So EX is stand for Employee Experience. So it's 9:30 in Vietnam right now. So it's good, really good to start a day, like start a working day with this lady, like Miss Tiffany Lee. And also, she's now the remote lead at Cargo One. This is like the booking platform for all the allies. And as I know, as I searched online, it's kind of interesting because it's based in Germany and now she's in Singapore. So definitely remote working. So yeah, so she can have like a lot of information to share with you for today. And yeah, so I will introduce a little bit about Trimflat first. So Trimflat is actually in Vietnam is a workplace experience provider where we can have like the best of both worlds, the private branded and professional office, and also the service engaged, and flexible workplace. This is kind of like the new, we want to emphasize the importance of the new way of working to everyone. So currently we have 5 existing locations. There are like 4 in Ho Chi Minh City and 1 in Hanoi. And for next year, we gonna open like 2 more location. It's gonna be in District 2 and District 4. So if you like really curious about that, you can go to our website to see the just the rendering image. And in Trimflat, like we do care a lot about the employee experience, the workplace experience for you guys. So not only for the for the design with like purpose driven, it's gonna be like about the member centric and it's the hospitalities. So we also did a lot of events. For the Trimflat Play, we have like the social, creative, the community in Trimflat. For the Trimflat Academy, we have the personal and professional development and work well-being. I know it's really important nowadays. It's going to be mental and physical well-being and the future goal. I will talk in detail later. And around that, it our technology platforms to support. So about the Dream Like Future Goal is design and develop just for the HR community and business leader, where we want to um, develop the core team inside the company to actually get the really innovative ideas to lead the organization. So we did it like for example, EX mini conference and startup expo. We did the research with the decision lab about Gen Z in the workplace because we know everyone is crazy about Gen Z right now. And the futures of and lately we have the futures of work cards when we collaborate with Fulbright and our strategic partners are AA Vietnam, VNG, like leaders, career leaders, and TVL groups. They are all like the leading organizations in Vietnam. So yeah, and as you join, this is EX Monthly Global Expert Chat, where we invite the global experts to come and to share about their experience, their point of view, their knowledge about what we think like they are expert on that. And like for example, for Stephanie Lee, she doesn't like the word expert, yeah, but like she gets familiar from that, so she will have a lot of things to share with you guys. Yeah, yeah, so that is done for my introduction. So now let's get back to our like guest speaker for today. So she is, as I introduced her first, is remotely at Cargo One, and I really love this question. Is like she reimagined the futures of work by building a remote first employee experience and the culture across borders. Yeah, so I think I will let her like introduce about herself first to you guys.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us at a pretty early time in Vietnam. I know the time zones are always tricky, and Mia and I tried to figure out a good one for Singapore and Vietnam, considering that most of my calls are in my afternoon because I work, as Mia said, in a German company and most of my team is there. So a little bit about me. I joined Cargo One as remote lead more than 2 months ago. And prior to that, I was doing team experience and operations in Buffer, which is a much more established remote company. And while I was at Buffer for close to 6 years, I worked on people ops, finance ops, IT ops. So that was a really good stepping stone and great environment for me to learn all the ins and outs of remote work and how to design a company for remote work. Because Buffer's been remote for more than 8 years, and Buffer was fully remote across the world. So taking that knowledge to Cargo One has been really interesting because Cargo One is, first of all, really young as a company. 4 years old, but really started growing in the last year or so. Mia and I were talking about how we've just expanded just exponentially in the last 11 months. And then thinking about how to scale that globally and then reimagining that experience in a remote first way as well. So I'm really excited to be here to chat with Mia.
Yes, actually, like I'm really surprised about like how you spend so fast. And as the information that you provide me is like 17 countries. Your employees are now in 17 countries. I know it's gonna be like a ton of work to do. You're busy right now. Yeah, you must really busy.
Yeah,
So
it's really cool though to keep up with all the changes. And I think now is such a good time for remote work compared to when I started at Buffer, and there were a lot of things that we had to bootstrap. So it's very exciting for me.
yeah, that's the reason why like I want to talk about this topic is because like we're having a new normal. I mean like our at least like Vietnam after the long lockdown. So the futures of work now is like the key term like make people actually realize that everyone has to change and to adapt for the new way of working. So we do have a lot like remote working, hybrid working, like from work from anywhere, work from home. And
Mhm.
yeah, so how did you apply the remote working and are any new way of working in your company? So we can start with the cargo one.
Yeah, so a little bit of background about Cargo One before I joined. They were actually already fully remote when I came on board in September. And part of it was getting ahead of the need for it because when the pandemic hit last year, early last year, and I understand from Mia that things are a little bit different in Vietnam. But what happened in Europe, as you might know, is that there were a series of lockdowns. Same in Singapore and in the US, which are the primary regions that I work with. And before that happened, the leadership in the company made the conscious decision to take everyone remote. So they closed the office. At the time, the team wasn't too big. I think it was 20 to 30 people. So it was really just taking their operations to the virtual sphere and then continuing that way. So heavy on Zoom calls, heavy on Slack, stuff like that. Uh, this year, we started to really scale up. So what we're realizing is that those practices don't necessarily scale quite well when we're going global and when the team is also growing so large because there's only so many meetings you can have in a day, and then there you still need time for like productive time and stuff like that. So a lot of the consideration, like where my mind's at, is how do we, whenever you design a remote first strategy, and I think that's important even for a hybrid company, it's important to think about what are the essential touch points for collaboration, for communication, and for connection. And that's really how we're thinking about it at Cargo One. But because we're so used to doing things a certain way, the way I'm approaching it just practically is also like, what are the most high impact things we can change instead of just sweeping everything and reintroducing a new system? So the change management for remote work transition, I think is really, really important.
Okay, understand that. And yeah, for this is kind of like the HR free talk. So feel free to jump in if you have like any questions like to ask
Yeah.
it. Like yeah, and also like for the next questions, I want like everyone to involve as well because this is really broad and in general questions like from your point of view. Is that like what are like the advantage and disadvantage of remote working?
Yeah. Um, let's start with the advantages. I
Yeah, we
mean,
talk about the advantages now. Yeah,
yeah,
we talk about that first.
yeah. And look, the way I always think about it is like, what are the advantages and the challenges of things? I used to be a teacher, so before this remote work part of my life, I used to teach, and I was very much about the growth mindset and seeing things as opportunities versus like disadvantages, so to speak. So let's talk about advantages, and then we'll talk about the challenges. Uh, Advantages around remote work is suddenly the world is your talent pool. I think that's the most obvious one. You're no longer constrained by the local market, and this means that you get to work with people that resonate with you culturally as well, like company culture wise, and not just like social culture. Right? So that's very exciting when you think about building the future of work and what companies could look like across borders. It means you'll find like-minded people anywhere in the world. Like we hire in Ukraine, we have people in South Africa. I have a really wonderful colleague that I connect with like on a personal basis, and she's in Argentina. And I never would have met her if not for remote work. So that's one huge advantage. Another one is, the flexibility. Excuse me, that was my vacuum cleaner. I'll be
Yes.
right back.
No worries about that. Yeah, we all got familiar with those things like when we do the remote working, is that like we have pets in our house and we have to control them a little bit.
Yeah, and this though is like one of the challenges of working from home, not remote
Yeah.
work. So the other advantage I would think is flexibility. You don't just have a flexibility on an individual level as an individual remote worker to really design your day and really integrate your life with your work life. So I have a bunch of colleagues, both at CargoOne and who are at Buffer, who have young children and they want to spend the morning sending them to school, packing them breakfast, and not worry about having to report to the office. And the flexibility around remote work allows them to do that. One of our other colleagues in Singapore at CargoOne takes calls in his car because that's what he can do with but he can ferry his kids to school and still take calls without feeling like it impacts his work. So that flexibility on an individual level is amazing. On a company level, you also get to really think about how do we operate and how do we create connection without being bounded by a physical space. It's a double-edged sword because it can be a challenge, and we'll talk about that later. But it's also such a creative opportunity. And a lot of remote companies get really, they just have like out of this world ideas because they're no longer constrained. And, they get to meet like people from all over the world and get ideas from all over the world as well. And then on an individual level, it's also great for freedom because compliance aside, and we'll figure out compliance, and there's a lot of stuff happening on that front, which is very exciting. You also get to work from wherever if your company crafts a policy around that. And that means like pre-pandemic, I was away a third to half the year working anywhere I wanted in the world because I could, and that broadened my life and my mind in such interesting ways. And then I took those experiences back to the company, and I'm sure it benefited them. So yeah, these are huge advantages. Now for the challenges, we talked about the lack of the physical boundary.
Yeah.
So that's tough for designing your company culture or maintaining it or reimagining what that looks like. And then that's also tough on the individual level if people are not set up to create the boundaries between work and life, especially with work from home, because you work at home. And worst case scenario, you live at work, right? You just happen to be sleeping in your office. That's the last thing we want. So boundaries are really tough. Definitely something to look out for, which is related to another challenge around mental health, because you don't see someone at their desk. You don't see how tired they are. I mean, in video calls you can, and it's good to check in, but we don't have all the soft cues that you have in an office. So you need to be extra intentional and extra vigilant in a remote setting to make sure that your team is still doing well. I think because of the crowd that we have today, I won't go into the compliance challenges around remote work.
Yeah.
But operationally, it's also, as you scale remotely, there are so many ways to do remote. You could do remote in a local setting within the same time zone. And that's really straightforward. It's just like, how do we work when we don't have a physical office, right? So the only challenge is space. If you work globally, remotely, as we do, you have the space challenge and you have the time challenge. So how do you design a day-to-day work, operating system that is inclusive for someone that's not awake when you're awake? Like that's having dinner while you're just getting started with your day. So those are the very specific challenges to remote work and distributed forms of remote work.
Okay, since like you talk about like the mental well-being, so there's
Mhm.
actually one questions from Miss Anne that as she asked you. Here's the questions like I've noticed that after the pandemic closures and during the transition between working from the office and fully teleworking, a lot of employees face psychological issues. They can't even work, realize what is happening to them. However,
Yep.
the change in energy is clearly visible. Have you ever faced that situation, and what is your advice to HR people to help the employees adapt better and regain the energy?
Yeah.
Mm,
We did. So last year, when the pandemic hit the US, and I mean, most of the world, again, I'm just so blown away by how Vietnam has handled it. It sounds amazing. But it was tough even for Buffer, which is used to working remotely. What we need to be mindful of, though, as we navigate the start of this, you know, dealing with pandemic, transition to remote work, mental health conversation, is that we need to be clear what the source of the stress, like what's the real stressor for our employees in this case? Is it the changing global situation, the changing local situation that's very stressful? Because there is a lot of stress around that. My parents had got COVID this year, and I couldn't see them because we're under quarantine, and I still worked remotely, right? So, but I knew the stress was because of my life situation and not because of remote work. So it's important to know where the stress is coming from. That's number one, so that you know what to tackle and what to deal with. And then it's also key to introduce measures to check in on your people and to also evolve your culture such that people feel like they have the permission to tell you where they're at. And I think that's a really important thing. You can only go so far with policy. In Buffer, what we did last year was introduce a 4-day work week at first so that people had more space to deal with life. They had more breathing room to cope with life while still getting work done. And eventually, Buffer made the 4-day work week a permanent feature of their operating system. That won't work with everyone. The 4-day work week is actually a very exciting new conversation happening in like the tech startup remote side of things. So that's a separate conversation. But that's definitely a possible measure. There are a lot of remote companies that also have specific mental well-being parts, like modern health or covering therapy, making sure people know that they're being supported. It's a huge signal when people know that the company supports their mental health. It also gives them permission, like I said earlier, to say something when things are going tough. So the example that I gave earlier when my parents got COVID, and I was under lockdown and I had like this huge project at work, is we already created a culture at Buffer where I felt like I could go to my manager and my team and say, things are really rough right now. I will still hang on, but I need you to know that this and this is happening. So at least it's a sense of support, even if you're not in the same company, in the same office,
mm,
right? And that goes a long way. It's the small things like that that build culture. It's the small things like that that help people feel supported. And I have to say, like, I felt way more supported in a culture like that than I would have when I worked in a co-located office. Yeah.
yeah, I'm so sorry for hearing about the it's like I hope that they're doing well right now.
Yeah, they're both great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you're a really strong woman, like yeah, to get over for that time. Yeah, I think like there's a lot of things like coming up about like the comic cultures and about the communications. Yeah, but yeah, we can ask. I can ask more deep questions to go deeply in this topic. To help to answer your questions like specifically is like as I told you about the context in Vietnam. So many companies now are like just starting. about the
Yeah.
remote working, why every companies in the global like start like 1 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're not really get familiar for that. So yeah, for your point of view, like what should they prepare for the starting changing into the new ways of working, especially for the remote working?
Yeah. Is this specifically around mental health or like the other, like just generally?
Yes, I think just generally first, and then can go to deeper the mental health, and yeah, maybe you can talk about like how you communicate with other people as well, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, great. That's a huge question. Let me think about where to start with that. I think the first thing to do, because I hesitate to say these are remote work best practices that will work for everyone. It doesn't exist, right?
Hmm.
And earlier before this chat, Mia, just to give everyone context, I was talking about how it's such a unique challenge to take a company through the remote work transition versus build a remote company from scratch, because there's change management that's a big part of it. So how I would do it, and the way I'm doing it at Cargo One, is to audit your current operating system, your current ways of working. And the question to ask yourself at any point in time is, if we were to have to shift to working virtually permanently, is this way of working going to be scalable? Is it going to be sustainable? If
Hmm.
it's not, that means you're heavily reliant on being in an office, um, and you need to change that, because otherwise then you're just seeing remote work as a BCP, a business continuity plan. And I haven't seen companies that just are waiting for remote work to be over that have succeeded and have like sailed through that. So you need to really think about how to go remote first. How do you make it such that you can work regardless of whether you're going back to the office? So that means, how are you communicating? Is it primarily through in-person meetups that you're now shifting to Zoom? That's not going to be sustainable because there's only so much time in the day. People are tired, Zoom fatigue, all those are real things. Do you have more asynchronous ways of getting things communicated? How are decisions made? Do people have to be in the same room to do that? Um, how are you connecting? Is it largely over the water cooler? Is it largely in the pantry, in the hallway? How can you then replicate that? How can you replicate that value in a virtual space? Because you can still build spaces in a virtual office, right? So if you use Slack, maybe you have water cooler chats. You almost have to front load a lot of the preparation and the intention behind it, because you can't rely on chance for people to connect. So can you introduce like a daily stand-up check-in? Can you introduce like daily icebreakers to ask people questions? Can you introduce greater intention when you start meetings, to check in with people? You know, when we're in the office, the day-to-day chatter happens organically. When you're waiting for people to walk into the conference room, you just be like, hey, how's your day? I saw your dog on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. Somehow, when we first moved to Zoom, we forget to do that because we're like, oh, we're here for a meeting. I need to start talking, right? So you have to be extra intentional to have the unintentional conversations. Like I remember just this week, I was chatting with one of our co-founders, and he was so intentional to be like, before we talk about work, how are you? Are you still having fun? Like, how's your dog? You know? And when we wrapped up, he was like also asking about things beyond the work that we talked about. And that's really, really important. You have to be intentional about that. So yeah, in your audit, also think about what were the things we left to chance and how can we engineer those such that you don't have to force people to talk. You don't have to be like, here are 5 questions you need to answer, right? You
Yeah.
can say, here are 5 questions in case you run out of things to talk about, and here are the opportunities for you to have that spark and then let it happen. So yeah, those are some things to start with.
Yeah, so yeah, we can start with like the oldest first, and then we will ask a lot of questions about what is going on and what is going to happen next if
Yep,
we change to the new way of working. Yeah,
yep,
and also create really small thing like to start with this new way of working about like daily check-in about how you do the ice breaking. Yeah, it's comes intentionally and really naturally a little bit about that for everyone not getting awkward and yeah just like the must have in the new way. Yeah,
yep.
that's really cool. And in terms of everything, like for example, like we did audit and we say that hey we have to shift in the new way of working and it's going to be start into the communications. Yeah, so how did you communicate with others? Like, is there any different to how you convince, like, communicate with your leadership, and also is you communicate with your employees?
Yeah, so there's figuring out if your infrastructure is optimized for the kind of communication that you need. So things like that we don't think about are like when you have an office, um, or even in a co-working space, right? You have bulletins, you have newsletters to update people on what's going on. Do you have something like that in your new virtual office to share the information that everyone needs, uh, across the board? How is that information communicated? Right now, we do it through Slack. It's not the best thing, and I'm working on that. I'm working on something that is more long form, more async friendly, because I'm conscious that while we don't have that much of a team, that big of a team outside of Europe, we are heading in that direction. So, do we have the infrastructure? And then communicating in such a way that um, my personal style is to uh, kind of go heavy on context, to over communicate. Because one of the things that tends to get missed is context in a remote setting. It's not like you can bump into someone in the hallway and be like, hey, by the way, what was that about? Like, can you send me that document? Right.
Yeah.
And it's also, in my opinion, one of the not optimal parts of working in a co-located space. We just take for granted that I can tap someone on the shoulder and ask a question. So I ask questions without really wondering, like, do they know where I'm coming from? When you do that remotely, it's extra difficult. So can we train people to communicate with context as priority? Um, and then to leadership, the way I find that it works is to start with the why. Like, what is the pain point that we're trying to solve? What is the value we're trying to deliver? And how are we doing it? If you don't start with a why and it's just a series of tactics, then you just end up doing a whole bunch of things that may or may not work, which goes back to like, do you know why you're doing certain things? And do you have the platforms to do it? If you don't have the platforms to do it, then that's what you need to fix first.
Yeah, technology that's really important right now, and also
Yeah.
like building like the whole like policy, and also give people the context to have the communication is really important. So as we talk about the leadership, actually Talia has one questions for you. Is that what are the roles of leadership in remote working? So are
Yeah.
there any changes from them?
Uh, the biggest one is buy-in. If they don't walk the talk, if they don't believe in remote work, it's not going to happen. Right. And this is not even about remote work. This is about any significant initiative you want to roll out in the people space and the HR space, because they're the ones that ultimately um, direct the culture. They don't set the culture, but they influence it heavily. So
Yeah.
if you want to say we're going remote first, and we're going async first, which is an even bolder uh, decision, right? Actually, async first to me is not very bold. Like if you're going async only, for example, and leadership is like, no, I want people to be on meetings with me all the time, then there's going to be dissonance in the company. So you really need leadership buy-in. And I think the way to do that is to let them know what the value is for the team and for the bottom line. like very pragmatically speaking. And they will also sign off on whether it fits the company culture that they have in mind. Now, company culture is very organic. It does, start at the ground, it's reinforced on the ground, but it also depends on like how they're approaching this, how culture evolves in your company. And if they're going to resist it, it's going to be really hard for you to roll it out.
So, but I do think that many, not really say that, but like many Vietnamese companies, they face that situations a lot where like this is a new way of working, like everyone did that and you have to do that as well, because it's not, because now employee are seeing other company doing that, and they start asking like, why can I have why can I not have it? Because like we did like for a long time like working from home and it's still productive, like why can why can I make a choice right now? Yeah, but as you know, like for the leadership, like they got familiar when seeing their employee in the office. Yeah, it's just like, hey, I need a meeting, and like, yeah, could just quickly do that. It's just go into
Yeah.
the rooms and then chit chat together, and then yeah, somehow they feel like it's engaged, and it yeah. But like,
Yeah.
do you have any tips to like, I mean, like to I don't want to use this word, but somehow to educate the leadership teams,
Yeah.
yeah, about the new way of working.
Yeah. No, I think it's a perfectly legitimate use of the term. A lot of them have to be educated because depending on where they're at in
Mm,
their career, they may, this is completely new to a lot of people.
mm,
And if a leader is used to running his or her company in a certain way, it's understandable why there's resistance, right? You could think of a transitional plan, like maybe show them what the virtual equivalent is. If there's someone that needs high touch and they need to always be in meetings to get context, can they set that up virtually, right? That's one way. It's not the most sustainable way, but it's an easy way to it's like teaching a kid to eat broccoli by like mashing it first and putting it in their food.
yeah.
I hope none of them are watching this and going like this person cannot be trusted. It's good for you, I promise, like broccoli. But the thing that I feel really works, and earlier when I said, their buy-in is so crucial, it doesn't mean it's doomed if they're not bought in, because you can still show them the value by having experiments in the company for little teams that are experimenting with ways of working. I think any good leadership, if they see like, hey, here's an experiment, I wasn't super convinced, but the outcome, the output was amazing, they're still super productive, they were so creative, and maybe more creative than before because they have the flexibility to design that day to work whenever they work best. Like seeing the outcome and the data around these efforts should be very helpful. You don't have to always roll things out from the top. I think from the top, what you need buy-in on is the direction and the culture and the first principles. But in terms of the efficacy of remote work, you can start, at the grassroots, because then it forms kind of like proof that something works. You're not going to nail it at the start anyway. You have to really do a lot of experiments with your company, and iterate fast. I think that's just the way to go with any of these initiatives.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so we talk a lot about the leadership, how we educate them. So it is one question from Phương, like, are there any skills that we need to reskill or upskill the employees? Like
A
when
lot.
we do the remote work. Oh, I think a lot of HR in this room is gonna be freaked out.
Yeah, no, I was just kidding. A lot, because I feel I actually don't mean a lot. It's one big one. And that's teaching them to take ownership of their workday. Now, I felt this strongly when I first transitioned to remote work, and I didn't really have the overall help because I had got into a very mature remote company. One of the biggest challenges you'll find transitioning to remote work is something we talked about earlier, which is the boundaries. So you need to train people to know how to own their day. Otherwise, they're going to get lost in calls. They're not going to know how to structure their day. They're going to get overwhelmed and then they're going to burn out. So if you can have a training session on like, literally, this is how you organize your calendar. These are the studies that show like how flow works, how focus time works, all of that, showing them that. And I run these sessions for my new joiners. That goes such a long way. Also because they feel like they're not alone. They know that they have the support. And that's the most crucial thing. Then the second thing, besides like enabling people to own their day, is to make clear what the best practices are for communicating in a remote setting. I really think that that's really key. How do they communicate with context? How do they communicate with clarity so that everyone around them that, you know, collaborates with them has the information they need to do their best work, even if they can't tap them on the shoulder, even if they weren't next to them in a co-working space. So those are the two things I would start with, skills-wise. And then when it comes to like collaboration, I feel that tends to happen more at the middle management side and designing your team's operating system versus like individuals. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and this one disadvantage is as you can see is the lacking of like the physical space because we're working remotely. So it's gonna be like the relationship between employees and company and among the coworker as well. So are there any activities that we should do to maintain the employee engagement?
Yeah. I think the way to approach this is to not think ad hoc. You need to really have programs and initiatives that will create the spaces for people to connect. Like I said earlier, you can't force people to connect. You need to give them the room to have that spark and chat, right? So there's so many ways to do this. You could have a coffee chat program. There are so many bots out there that can pair people up on Slack. Making sure that it's communicated that your coffee chat is also work. It's also part of your work day. It's not something you do in your after hours. And that's important because you're not going to bump into someone at the water cooler. You need to go out and meet people, right? And then you can have gatherings, you can have book clubs, you can have gatherings. When I say gatherings, I mean like conversations around shared topics. They could be cultural topics. Then it's kind of meta where you create the platform for people to engage on company cultural topics. You can have masterminds for people to feel like they have someone to journey with. A lot of things. Just think about what are the things that happen organically in an office, and then replicate that. That's really like how we do it, right? What's the value of that, and then what does it look like virtually? So it's not a prescription to do coffee chats. Some teams do daily stand-ups. You may or may not want to do that. I don't find that that's very helpful if your team is globally distributed, just because not everyone's going to make it. But maybe it'll help your team. Like in Vietnam, if you're just transitioning to remote work, I'm assuming most of you are in the same time zone. So just checking in with everyone, you know, could be great. My team has like a breakfast social, which is my tea time. And then we just show up with coffee and we're like, this is what I'm having today. And then someone's like, oh, I'll tell them like, oh, I'm attending a wedding. That's why I'm dressed like that. And I'm going to go after this and we'll just chat about stuff like that. You know, creating opportunities for people to do that is really important. And then culture happens in the in-between. Like I said, at the start of your call, at the end of your call, even for work, how are you doing things? How do people communicate in Slack? Do they have a place to just share random things that happen? Do they have a place to crack jokes? We have a virtual office at Cargo One. It was one of my fun initiatives. So I don't know if you've heard of Gather Town. They just ran their Series B.
I know that.
Yes.
It's really
So we
fun,
have
but
a,
yeah.
yeah, it's super fun. And my colleague, you haven't seen my dog, but he's a little white fluffy dog. So my
Oh,
colleague made a little white fluffy dog for me and he put it next to my desk to gather down, you
yeah.
know?
For
Yeah, it's
everyone,
little things like that.
yeah. Now for
Yeah.
later, I will put a link here that where the guided towel like it's allow you to create like the physical like the virtual physical office online. You can
Yeah,
it's just like playing game. It's kind of
it
fun.
is. Yeah. And we have our meetings there because they have a video call function. So we moved everything together town, which is really, really fun. So yeah, and then between the employees and the company, I just want to make sure I get to that as well. Um, it's what is the company, how does the company communicate? Is the company getting feedback on the where you're working? We've integrated these questions into our monthly survey. So we are always, on top of the pulse of how the company is feeling. Um, do you have initiatives and programs to encourage people to observe or express gratitude and appreciation for the ways in which your company culture has been lived virtually? Um, I think recent research in gratitude has shown that it's not just having a gratitude practice where you write down what you're grateful for that has benefits for mental health and connection. It's also receiving gratitude that helps one feel good, right? So, how do you integrate that in your virtual workspace? And how do you integrate that in a way that anyone in the company, regardless of where they're located, is able to tap into that feeling of connectedness? Um, so things like that. I find that the high fives and the gratitude, that really is special. I've seen that both at Cargo One and Buffer and a bunch of other remote companies. When you can say to someone like, hey, that was a really good job and you crushed it, right? It makes them feel good and it makes them feel like, oh my God, I have a friend in the company. What you want is people to have friends in the company. So how can you do that? That's really important.
So like from your point of view, like from your side, you see like people tend to be like happier and more productive like when they work remotely. So yeah, I think like a lot of I see a lot of HR in the rooms and they are now in between, of course, the employees and also
Yeah.
like leadership. And going to the remote working like it's a long journey. So they have to prove it to the leadership like this is work best. So this is the new way of working. We have to do it. So are there any ways to measures? I know Cargo Dog one is just applied for 1 year, but how about before that they apply it for like 8 years? So are there any way that you can prove it to the leadership team that hey, this is work?
Um, remote work works.
Yeah.
Well, I think start with the data that you have. In HR, what's your data dashboard currently look like? What metrics are you using? They use that same metric to see like is your EMPS score taken a dip? Um, are people self-reporting feelings of connection or lack of connection? Are you seeing that people are not meeting their targets, for instance? And more importantly, especially for Vietnam, when you're in this period of transition, do you have the data that you need to know for sure if this is because of remote work or work from home or pandemic? I feel that at the start of the pandemic, for a lot of like European and US companies and even Singaporean companies, a lot of people misattributed a drop in productivity to remote work when it was largely work from home and pandemic that were the stressors. So what I said earlier is be really clear what's impacting performance, if anything. First of all, be really clear how you're measuring performance, even outside of remote work. And then if there's an impact to performance, is it because of remote work, pandemic, work from home? Because remote work is not work from home. Remote work doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck with your kids and your pets all day. I used to work from coffee shops at my gym all the time, and my dog never barked, or I didn't know when he was barking, right? And then do the comparison. I think it's really interesting when you have that transition to have like in-office data and then remote work data. But if you don't have the data you need around what are the factors contributing to it, then you need to change the way you're measuring things.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so so actually we just have time for one questions left. So I think like these questions like people are really curious about is your like your current experience right now about like are there any obstacle that you're facing up like when you do the remote working that you can share to everyone so they can maybe like notice about it or like maybe avoid it.
Um, Let me think, because my context is very global and distributed.
Yeah, because you have like 17 countries. I really wonder like why you how you can keep everyone like working remotely for like 17 countries, how you keep like community cultures like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Must be quite
Well,
hard.
so I'll share one about from that context and then share one about change management, if
Yeah.
that helps.
Mm,
So if remote work is exciting for the people here and their companies want to go global and distributed, the challenge is that that global distribution. How do you stay compliant? How do you keep people engaged? How do you introduce policies that um, taps on the benefits of remote work, but doesn't impact your company productivity? Right? If people want to travel, which is a huge benefit of remote work, there was the whole digital nomad train that's like
yeah.
take it off. It's at the next station now, right? What are the policies around that? How are you going to do that? How are you going to communicate across cultures? It's one thing to communicate within your culture because you have the same appetite for context, you have the same way of giving feedback. How do you do that globally? um, how is an American going to give feedback to a Japanese person? How is a Japanese person going to give feedback to an American person? Very different, very exciting. That's what we're thinking about. And then at a change management level, which is my lived reality as well, it's really triaging what are the urgent and important things in this crafting of my remote strategy and my remote playbook that needs my attention now, because there's going to be 20, 30 spinning plates. So I would strongly encourage everyone here who's trying to transition their company to remote work to figure out what's urgent, important, what's urgent, not important, what's important and not urgent, and what is something that you can just let burn because you have to be okay with that. Because also it's a pandemic. It's really stressful. And
Yeah.
then are you taking care of yourself, HR people?
Mhm.
Because people are the worst at taking care of themselves. They take care of everyone else around them, and
Yeah,
then
I
they're like,
think that.
I will rest when everyone is rested. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually like to wrap up this section is actually like remote working, especially for in Vietnam, it's just start and good things actually take times a lot. You have to take time to build the system. You have to take time to do everything in terms of like convince the leadership, communications, and thinking about activities in the new ways of working and yeah, thinking a lot about that. But I can believe it. It's this really exciting, really interesting journey that you can have. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of opportunities when you change into remote working, as like Stephanie says, it's gonna be like the talent pool that you can like Cargo One, you can have like different employees from like different cultures. Yeah, it's really exciting things that you can have in remote working, and you have like the chance to touch on the technology point as well. Yeah, because you know that technology is gonna be the futures right now. Is at least for like the next 10 years. I don't know, like for 20 years it's gonna be the new thing, yeah, but at least for the next 10 years you have to be adapt for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it's flexible and freedom as well. So yeah, so I think
Yeah.
it's really good thing. And yeah, thank you, Stephanie, for like this really good sections. and it's really meaningful and insightful of what you're sharing for everyone else. I hope like everyone will feel the same. That yeah, for those questions will help your company, especially that you are now just starting to think about remote working. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope that yeah, I hope that everyone will feel the same. Yeah, thank you so much for everyone joining today. And thank you so much, Stephanie. And you can find Stephanie on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Maybe, yeah, it's good for it. Can I put your
Yeah,
link
please
here?
do. Yes.
Yeah, and you can like, yeah, have a chat with her or asking her about the remote working for your company. Yeah, let me send you guys the link here. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. And Farhan, I hope that I know that your company is starting from now. So yeah, thank you so much for asking those questions, so we can have like more chance to talk about like especially the journeys, actually how you do the change management from the start. Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay,
All the
okay,
best, everyone.
all the best, everyone. So thank you. Bye bye.